Good evening in New York, Los Angeles, and the Americas. Good morning in Cambodia in Asia. Good afternoon in Australia, and welcome whatever time of day or night for all who are joining us from all corners of the world. I'm Yael Danieli, founder and executive director of the International Center for the Prevention, Treatment, and Study of Multigenerational Legacies of Trauma. It's ICMGLT for short. Thank you for joining our webinar on Cambodia's Victory Day, Intergenerational Meanings and Legacies. Today's International Center for the Study, Prevention, and Treatment of Multigenerational Legacies of Trauma webinar is held in collaboration with Documentation Center of Cambodia organization, DCCAM. January 7 marks the 46th anniversary of the fall of the Khmer Rouge or Pol Pot regime that killed 2 million people, nearly 25% of Cambodia's population in 1975, what is known as the Cambodian Genocide, which lasted from 1975 to 1979. On this 46th anniversary of Cambodia's Victory Day, international multi-generational panelists will review and reflect upon the meanings and legacies of the genocide, the victory, their implications and multidimensional aftermaths for generations of Cambodian people at home and abroad. Your moderator, I'm a clinical psychologist, traumatologist, victimologist, and psychohistorian. I have devoted much of my career to studying, treating, writing about, and preventing lifelong and multi-generational impacts of massive trauma worldwide, to ensuring victims' rights, the rights of future generations, and to reparative justice. Today's first speaker is Youk Chhang, a survivor of the Khmer Rouge genocide. Youk Chhang has directed the Documentation Center of Cambodia, DCCAM, for Khmer Rouge atrocities since its creation in 1995. He helped found the Institute for International Criminal Investigations, IICI, and was senior fellow at Rutger University Center for the Study of Genocide, Conflict Resolution, and Human Rights. Currently fundraising for the Queen Mother Library, Asia Future Primary Genocide Studies Center. His awards include Ramon Magsaysay Award and Truman-Reagan Medal of Freedom. ICMGLT, our center, is honored as Youk Chhang is a member of our honorary board. Our second speaker tonight is Dr. Lee Sok-King, director of An Long Veng Peace Center, oldest of 4 children of Khmer Rouge survivor farmer parents of Kandal province. King earned his bachelor's degree at Royal University of Phnom Penh, his master's and PhD at Coventry University, United Kingdom. He authored the book Reconciliation Process in Cambodia, 1979-2007, before the Khmer Rouge Tribunal. and co-authored, quotes, Guidelines for Tour Guides, A History of An Long Veng Community, the final stronghold of the Khmer Rouge movement. King, we are expecting your books in our library. Third is Reka Kuon. Born in California to Pol Pot survivors, Reka Meng Kuon is a first-generation Cambodian American. Her parents and older brothers were Cambodian refugees. She works as a licensed clinical social worker with patients impacted by intergenerational trauma and is pursuing a PhD in clinical psychology. Her dissertation focuses on healing intergenerational trauma. She's dedicated to providing inclusive, culturally competent mental health care to BIPOC communities. Last but not least is another old friend, Maurice Eisenbrook. Maurice Eisenbrook is a medical anthropologist and transcultural psychiatrist. He holds professorial level appointments in psychiatry at Monash University and anthropology at University of Melbourne. He has worked at University of Cambridge, Harvard Medical School, and Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique, and has been consultant with UN agencies. He has been awarded the International Distinguished Fellowship of the American Psychiatric Association. His research for 35 years has focused on traditional healing, Buddhist psychotherapy, and disasters in Cambodia. We have an hour and a half for the webinar. Each of our panelists will speak for about 8 minutes. Following an interchange among us, I will open the floor to questions or brief comments from the virtual audience. We will then conclude with, quotes, last words. Please use the Q&A or chat functions, and we will do our best to respond to as many questions as possible and brief comments as we can. Feel free to direct your questions to a particular panelist or to the full panel. I now have the great honor to offer the screen to Youk Chhang. Youk, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Yels. Good morning from Cambodia. I've been thinking about, since I got the invitation to join this webinar. I think that the most important is that I will focus on 3 questions, because there's so many questions that need to be asked to reflect since the fall of the Khmer Rouge in 1979, which has been 46 years by now, by yesterday, actually. And the question I'm going to pose, and we'll make a brief discussion so that we would lead, I hope, to more questions so that we can somehow try to answer. These questions are among the many other that are still debating in Cambodia today. One of the questions that we have been hearing and has been very controversial as of today is the question about period peace accord. You know, there's every Cambodia government have recently claimed that everything has been written in a period peace agreement in 1990 has been integrated or included in the current Cambodian constitution. And then on the other side, people are still demanding to enforce the languages that's been written into the Accord in 1990. So the question that I would pose on this particular topic, has Cambodia realized the objective of the Paris Peace Agreement? Why we should talk about this. And I think that when you look back in 1990, that's because during the negotiation, the genocide was denied by all parties to include it into the Paris Peace Agreement for the sake of peace. So, the Khmer Rouge were invited to join the election, but the crime of genocide, even the language of genocide, were denied even to be used for the sake of peace. So everyone's, after so many years of war and tired of war, I guess give peace of chance and go, and move and go ahead for a agreements that would look forwards rather than, dig the hole of the past and try to see who was committed or responsible for the deaths of nearly 2 million Cambodian people. I think that was a mistake. It was a mistake. And that as you have seen, that after the UN election, during the election, Khmer Rouge boycott the elections. And public still demand the prosecution of the Khmer Rouge leader has been continued. So that gives so much room, perhaps responsibility to the Cambodian government to take care of themselves after the election. And that's what led to where we are today. Who's brought peace to Cambodia, who put the Khmer Rouge, who finished up the Khmer Rouge, who ended the Khmer Rouge genocide, is still debating until today. If we recall, after the UN elections, Khmer Rouge boycott the election, and that's Cambodia faced a small controversial challenges among the faction, which were getting played by the Khmer Rouge topics at that time. And this is where that U.S. Congress had decided to draft a Cambodian Genocide Justice Act, which in fact signed into law by Clinton and began to investigate and to put the Khmer Rouge leader on trial, where the Yale Cambodian Genocide Program took place and where DC came to exist today. So it was a crucial moment at that time, which I think at that time people didn't realize that the work that we are doing actually contribute to peace building, to peace sustainability, and to the growth of this country. Because people also see that the Khmer Rouge was a past, like an ancient past, a long, long time ago. While in fact, when after we lost 2 million, there are still 5 million around telling the story today. And they are the parent of this younger generation, which make up of 17 million population today. So actually Cambodia, it's still recent, Khmer Rouge is still a recent past, but perhaps we're perceived or convinced with as an ancient history. Because of that, I think that made the work of the Cambodia and Cambodian government, made the work of U.S. Genocide Justice Act in Cambodia was so crucial. So our work, we managed it to collect, to convince, and finally in 2006, the international community seemed to agree with the initiative by U.S. and Cambodia to bring the Khmer Rouge leader on trial and came to support. And we managed to bring most of them and put them on trials. But it took 16 years. The question is, what would have been if we then perhaps include genocide in the Paris Peace Agreement? and insist on that. What would have been if the UN decide not to leave Cambodia, but maintain in the country and enforce the result of the election? So those are the lessons, and I think that need to be answered. The second question that I would like to pose that how much has Cambodia transformed since 1979 to ensure the condition that contribute to the Khmer Rouge are prevented? We started in 1995, 30 years ago, but not a single day that people have overlooked that how much survivors were demanding for justice, for genocide justice. People talk about it, people integrated too many forms of institution, political training, propagandas, radio program, fighting, negotiating, you name it. DCCAM was not the primary effort, but actually the last effort to perhaps based on what has been done since the fall of the Khmer Rouge in 1979 and put them together into a context and pursue a prosecution of the Khmer Rouge leader. So basically recognize the effort of the survivor. And that where we began to understand that how much justice is mean to human being. Despite they were poor, despite they were separated, despite the loss of their family member, people want justice. People want justice. And that has been the core objective, one of the core objectives of this camp for justice. So I think that Cambodia has done so much, it transformed so much, it tried so much to prevent. Despite all the method, perhaps approach that doesn't perhaps meet at our expectation or perhaps does not really present it the way it should be. But the intention is really to prevent the return of the Khmer Rouge from beginning, because so much loss, so much suffering, and we understood this more than anybody else. But that question also remain debating how much has been done. People point out to the former Khmer Rouge who are now official. People point out to the some of the lower level who were not part of the prosecution. So many out there around the country. Among the 5 million who survived, many of them were perpetrators, actually commit crime of killing directly, physically at the village level. But I think this time we also give the chance to peace and perhaps also try to reconcile, see whether Cambodia manage this and keep moving on into the future. The third question that I would perhaps put up and for discussion, every January the 7th is already debate for 46 years, either liberation or invasion. There's many books written about that. And you can see that Cambodia divided into 3 groups. Cambodia who never left the country after the Khmer Rouge embraced the liberation idea that they were liberated, they reborn. January the 7th was second birthday, for example. Those among Cambodians who never left the countries at all. But for those who left, end up along the border of Thailand or somewhere else, that they look at this as it's a government that created by the Vietnamese, and therefore it's not really about the victory over the Khmer Rouge, but actually about the invasion of the Vietnamese to Cambodian population. And those, the refugees who did not manage to go to America, to other third country, but has been returning a repatriation during the UN election in 1993. So their view is completely different than the one who were in the country. The reason I'm aware of that, because I worked for the UN myself as the electoral officer at that time. And we are required to hire everyone who returned from the border, because it's part of the repatriation. Also, one thing that the UN want to guarantee is employment. So all of my staff in the electoral component in Gambung province, I have 294 staff. Almost 200 were from the border. And that perhaps they're also familiar with technology, with computer, with English, while the people who were in the country doesn't even know how to turn on the computer. And then there's no English because English was forbidden to learn inside Cambodia at that time during Vietnamese occupation. So, and then you have the third group, people who were living in America, in France, in Australia, who look at January the 7th in different perspective. Not just only about look at this as the invasion, but also look at the responsible of the king, for example, or the responsibles of the Vietnam War. So we are completely divided during the period of calling for to put the Khmer Rouge leader for prosecution. Cambodians were clearly divided. I went to Canada. It's completely different view. Canadian, Cambodian, Canada. I went to Long Beach. It's completely different view. Then I went to the countryside, to the village. It's completely different view. We have conducted annual survey about the view whether the people of Cambodia who all suffer by the Khmer Rouge really want justice or not. And then becoming the definition of what does justice mean. And everyone lost a loved one. So everyone have a say and what should or should not be done. So I think that until today, January 7th, it remained part of their debating. But this time it's more a bit different because it's somehow people like perhaps Rutger or maybe her younger niece and nephew were born after the Khmer Rouge, have no direct experience with the Khmer Rouge. So you create a new population of two groups of the 5 million who survived, and then the 12 million who were born after the Khmer Rouge. But among the 12 million, about 1 million living abroad or were born abroad. But now they've been returning to Cambodia, and they have a different question, why their grandparents were killed, or why their grandparents died without justice. So they pose a different question, but it's no longer the same during my time that had direct experience from the Khmer Rouge time. We seem to have the same version of the narrative, the starvation, the execution, the separation, the loss. But the younger have different question. And therefore, they also question January the 7th. What is this? January the 7th, and why not January the 7th, 78? Why not January the 7th, 76? Why January 7th, 79? Why Vietnamese were here? And why we live in America? Why we in Canada? We are Cambodian? Why we live in France? You know, so I have met a lot of young Cambodians coming to discover their roots and the history of their parents and ask completely different questions. So then becoming a question, how much that January 7th is significant to those who are affected by the Khmer Rouge. It doesn't matter where they live, in Cambodia, in America, in France. You know, was how significant it is to the survivor of the genocide. And also how significant it is to people who were born after the genocide. You know, in Cambodia, we have millions of them now. And most of them start to learn this as compulsory only in 2009 about the Cambodian genocide history. And only recently we have heard that the Royal University of Phnom Penh claimed that a lot of students are interested in history. 10 years ago, they studied accounting, IT for employment because those was a booming period, you know, you study for employment. So all of them went to accounting, IT, management, but now people start to study history. So I think that it's important that that whatever question that we have asked, I think that the two main important question, how would we react then? Or why we're not reacting to it when the Vietnamese were here? Or how do we react to it at that time? I think, any other question asked, it's still not at the question like why I lost my sister, why I lost my parents, why we will suffer, and why my grandparents lost during the Khmer Rouge time. And that's a question that we perhaps should try to respond to it every year during the January the 7th, rather than becoming the question that has been asked and overlook the most important question that really need to be asked, to be answered. So I would like to end it now by having those three questions. One is how Cambodians realize the objective of the Paris Peace Agreement, which is very important because also related to the Constitution. How do we live today and how do we move on to the future as a country with rule of law? The second question also is important, how much that January the 7th contribute to the prevention of the Khmer Rouge genocide. Genocide happened around the world these days, and still happening this day. And the last question, how significant of January the 7th to the survivor and to the young generation. So I would leave it here, and hopefully that we can generate more questions and we can discuss. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear friend. We should have a series of webinars on these separate questions. But luckily, we do have two children of survivors here. One Cambodian king and the other American, Rutger. And I'm sure they will have something to contribute, knowing King probably to the first and last question, and knowing a little bit on Rutger's work, it would be the third question primarily. And then Maurice will try to do his best with all of it. So King, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to be part of the discussion on the Victory Day, January 7. Actually, if we talk about the Victory Day, we should think about two types of people, like the Khmer Rouge who do not leave the village after the Vietnamese attacks, and the other Khmer Rouge who fled to the border. That's why our second director talked about the Paris Peace Agreement and the period after, like win-win policy to reintegrate the Khmer Rouge into the national fold. So what I comment on the Victory Day is that, in my opinion, it's a day of survival, reconciliation, and peace. So survival, it means without Vietnamese support of the Cambodian defecting unit, I think it's not possible to eject the Khmer Rouge from power, and the people will still suffer from the atrocity of the Khmer Rouge. So that's what we call the Cambodian people survive the Khmer Rouge regime. So that's one point. The other point is about why we call healing or reconciliation, because some Khmer Rouge member maybe at a junior level, they do not defect to the border, so they live in the village. So they can be group chief or unit chief or sometimes village chief. So they still live around. So the Victory Days can like back in 1980. So they came together to join and celebrate the fall of the Khmer Rouge regime. So it's part of the process that the government at that time provide a space for them to gather and learn to live close to each others or to coexist peacefully rather than take revenge against each other. That's the second thing. And the third point is that with the Victory Days, as our DCCAM director has mentioned already, we had to work, like the government at that time work more to bring the Khmer Rouge faction into an agreement to end the fighting. But the Khmer Rouge boycott, I do not repeat. And so what we enjoy the full peace in Cambodia is the 29 December 1998. It was the time that the Khmer Rouge, the last stronghold of the Khmer Rouge in An Long Way, reintegrate into the government. So that's the verbal guarantee from the Prime Minister, as you may know. It's the in exchange for peace, the government guarantee their position, their property, and their life. So that's the process that we enjoy full peace in Cambodia in the meantime. So that's the Victory Day. And sometimes people argue that we have 20 May days of anger. It's a little bit a contradiction to the reconciliation or healing process, but actually not, because the days of anger at that time, it's the process that the survivor and including a former Khmer Rouge member in the village, they all join force to campaign or to speak against those Khmer Rouge on at the border. So that's why it's like creating a uniform propaganda against the civil war at that time. So it's not a contradiction at all, but actually it's a contribution to the process of Cambodian society with a really peaceful environment. So that's what I contribute, and I'm happy to answer if any question that relate to this. Thank you.
Turn on your microphone, Yael. Yael, you need to turn on your microphone.
Thank you. You have a lot more to say, King, based on your own research and the initiatives of your center. So you might want to take a moment or two for each of these, so you're fully represented with your own opinions too and experience. Go ahead.
Okay. I thank you for letting me continue. An Long Way is the initiative of DCCAM, which is directly to our DCCAM director Youk Chhang. He take that initiative, and I myself work there. With 80% of the people there are former Khmer Rouge combatant or members, and they live with the same mentality at some point, and maybe ideology as well. So An Long Wang have 14 historical sites, and one of which is the former Khmer Rouge leader Pol Pot. Pol Pot died in that community, and his body was cremated there. And DC came with the help from the architecture student. We put a roof on top of that grave to preserve that grave for education, for like public awareness of the genocide and prevention. So a lot of people visit that site. as part of their visit to the historical site. And the other, like Pol Pot's bunker or hideout. So a lot of physical evidence were in An Long Veng. So I work with both former Khmer Rouge combatants and members and their children. And very interesting point, some former Khmer Rouge member children, they believe that Victory Days was good. It's was good, and the country uh, like move into another level. And I asked them, do you think any challenge or comment on that? Be frank with it. They said, Vietnamese present in Cambodia for the last 10 years, from 1929 to 1989. They feel the Vietnamese presence was a risk to our national sovereignty. That's their comment. They appreciate the effort or struggle by the Khmer Rouge in collaboration with Fun Sing Pek and non-communist group uh, led by Sơn San. So they feel very constructive to have that movement or the struggle to chase Vietnamese away from our country in 1989. So that's one point. And they, even though they feel this, but they appreciate the survival of the Khmer Cambodian people. Yes. And in An Long Veng itself, we educate the children of the former Khmer Rouge members about the genocide, about the atrocity during the Khmer Rouge time, and we talk about peace, we talk about conflict in theory, and we also get a lot of information from them, like build trust with them, and they share with us some experiences so that we can learn both from the victim side and also from the former Khmer Rouge member side. That's all that's all I can say. Thank you.
Okay, we do have the dialogue among us, so whatever comes up for you and you haven't said yet, you have a chance. Well, we are now moving to the United States, all the way to the West Coast, where there are many Cambodians. And Reka, you have the burden and the honor of speaking from your point of view as a child of Khmer survivors and sibling, right? As well. So please unmute yourself.
Thank you.
And we are very most eager to hear from you.
Yes, thank you so much. So I'm speaking from my personal experience as a direct descendant of my mom, who was a refugee, and also my older brothers. So my mom is 73 years old now. She's in great health and spirits. My brothers, 51 years old and 47 years old, both of their father was executed along with my grandfather. They are, speaking of re-traumatization, they are both incarcerated here in the United States, and so still made it to America, but didn't quite make it. However, with my mom and her family, I do have 5 aunts who live here, and also 3 uncles who also survived. And yeah, and my father also survived, but he was not part of the Pol Pot regime. So from my personal experience as a bicultural Cambodian American, I've had to learn how to embrace 2 cultures, 2 opposite cultures, from the East and the West. And so from a very young age, I'm having to learn to speak two different languages and then interpreting for my family, filling out paperwork, doing, business with like older adults as a kid. So this was a really different experience from other kids that I grew up with, right? They didn't have this kind of experience, especially because I grew up in Oregon and it was very different. There wasn't a large Cambodian population there. As an adult, again, still struggling with being a little different from my peers. There's a legacy burden that I carry. I'm proud to carry. It's not without its challenges, but it is, the burden of being blessed to be born here in America after the fact, and also being able to take care of my family. And, the burden is to continue to care for them, and, for many generations. And so, growing up, I loved hearing my mom's stories. She shared very painful stories, a lot of hardship, but with a lot of humor. And she highlighted a lot of her strength and resilience in her stories. And I have a lot of gratitude for that, as it influenced me and really helps me to be who I am today and where, how far I've come. She's, a huge, like a huge influence in my life. Her spirituality is her biggest coping mechanism here. And she often prays to her ancestors and those before her, and, being Buddhist. And so I'm grateful for that. I work as a mental health therapist. I was really inspired because I can speak Khmer, I was inspired to want to work in the Cambodian community. And I got the opportunity to work in Long Beach with a lot of clinical mental health clinics, and am able to be a therapist there and work with the community. A lot of hardships still in the community, even though it's been 46 years. The hardship didn't really, it's better, but it's not really better. There's still a lot of poverty. There's still a lot of mental health struggles, not only with the Cambodian survivors, but also their children and their grandchildren. And so there is an intergenerational healing that still needs to happen, compared to other cultures that have been here many generations. It feels like we're trying to catch up. In addition, not just working with Cambodians, but my experience with working with other cultures and immigrants and refugees, they also struggle with the same things of being bicultural. And there is a feeling of where it feels like it doesn't quite fit, right? Like you're not as American, but you're not as Cambodian. You don't know where you're supposed to be at, right? And so I'm finding, as I'm working with a lot of my patients, that I'm not the only one who experiences that, but also there is this special gap that psychologically, I think, where we might exist as a bicultural person. And that is something that I'm working on in my dissertation as well as a PhD student. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I hope that highlighted some of my experiences growing up.
Thank you. That's a good beginning for continuing our dialogue. So by far, we've had some of the historical perspective, some of the political perspective, some of the socio-ecological perspective. And we're beginning to touch also on the psychological or psychosocial, because it's not only psychological. And you present a particular a unique perspective because you share both in the perpetrator and in the victim. You literally share in the history of this genocide. Thank you so much for sharing with us until now. Maurice, we are now moving to Australia. Maurice, if you unmute, we are most eager to hear your perspective.
I thank you, Yael, for giving me the opportunity to join this particular group. And in a sense, I'm the least competent because I'm the only foreigner. So I say that with a sense of humility amongst the group of Cambodians who are speaking here. Let me just give you a sense of my perspective over the last 45 years. In the mid-1970s, I was a young child psychiatrist in Australia. And I went to the post office and there was a sign on the door saying, mail service to the Khmer Republic temporarily suspended. It looked like it might be for a few days. We had no idea that, first of all, there was no Khmer Republic anymore, and secondly, that those few days would extend for 4 years. We thought naively that there might be some mental health problems, and I don't want to talk about those right here. And it was with that in mind that I thought, let's go and find out how we can be best equipped to handle the children and the young people who might come to Australia from Cambodia as refugees. Some came, but hardly any could until 1979, when the gates opened. And we then realized that we had absolutely no idea how to handle the suffering or the experience, the trauma, to manage what these people had been through because we didn't know. Then came the first lesson. How do we learn from the past? And how do we, in a sense, avoid the repetition of the same mistakes as we made before? And it's a testament to the auspice of this particular webinar that Yael has established an organization that is trying to learn from one wave after the next of displacement, traumatization. So we don't have to start from the beginning all over again each time. Part one. It seemed after a time that there would be differences in the resettlement policies as to how they would position themselves, whether it was the US or Australia or France or Canada, in receiving people from war-torn settings and in responding to their mental health, psychosocial, sociological, and cultural needs. I'll give a quick vignette. It would be only natural that in a situation post-1979 that many people would come seeking help who had been abandoned or had lost parents or were in artificial family settings, structures that were not actually genuine, that had been established ad hoc. We call them unaccompanied minors. The policy in Australia for unaccompanied minors was that they would be kept into group homes amongst Cambodians and gradually would learn to accommodate to Australian society. The policy in the United States was completely different. These children, or these young people, were put onto aeroplanes and sent to resettlement in Massachusetts or Rhode Island or other settings where they would be immersed rather deliberately as foster children or adopted children in American families. The idea being that they would be assimilated quickly. And here, the rubric was, you suffered in a Buddhist setting, and it's because of that that you now need to be reintegrated into, let's call it, an American Christian setting where you'll forget about the trauma and you'll become reborn. You'll be reborn. This is a fundamentalist evangelical position. Forget the trauma, forget the design. And if you have dreams during the night that your parents or the ghosts of the past have somehow flown across the Pacific Ocean and are sitting on your chest and crushing you and preventing you from breathing, forget it. They are primitive ghosts. We want you to learn how to be healthy, mentally well Americans. So the idea was sever the links. France had a different policy again, and I don't want to take too much time about that, but this is the snapshot of where the starting point is. After some years of looking at this, I thought, this is ridiculous. Why are we spending so much time trying to understand how to reintegrate or resettle small groups of people when we're amputating ourselves from where they came from? Let's go upstream. Let's find out what was going on in the country of origin, in Cambodia, where unlike having 5,000 refugees here or 10,000 there, we've got millions and millions of people who are forgotten. Why are they forgotten? Because they were stigmatized as being part of the political social problem that Youk has referred to. In other words, they are the ones who are, if I could say, communists. And never mind whether they are Communist, Chen, or Yuan, Russian, Chinese, whatever it is, Albanian, they are over there, and we're starting again over here. How misguided we were as foreigners. You see, I'm calling myself a foreigner. And I thought we must go upstream and find out what's really going on in the bedrock. So the next bedrock for me was to go to Site 2, Site 8, Site B, Kawidang, Panatnikom, all these settlements around the periphery of Cambodia on the Thai border. And depending upon where you went, you had 4 completely different realities. If you go to Site B, which at that time was a Funsinpak Sihanouk stronghold, you get one reality. If you go to Site 2, which was the biggest Khmer community outside Cambodia at the time, hundreds of thousands of people, essentially KPNLF, Son San. I'm not discussing politics here, but reality. You get a different reality. Very interesting there, because if we went into that place, there were dozens of NGOs had come, mainly fundamentalist. Some of them had deals. They'd say, if you let us build a church in this part of the camp, we'll give you guns. The resistance movement was linked with the evangelical movement. In Site 2, that was the situation. In Site 8, it was very interesting. I expected in the Khmer Rouge camp, there would be no Buddhist monks, but there were. I expected in Site 8 that they'd be anti-religion, but they were not. And the NGOs who were in Site 8 were delighted because as fast as they could give them, the Khmer Rouge leadership in the camp and the cadres couldn't have enough. They wanted more Bibles. What were they doing with the Bibles? They were beautiful parchment documents printed on onion skin, 45 gram, very light. But as fast as they were getting them, they were using them to roll cigarettes. So from the outside, we thought, oh, well, they're going to learn about Western ideas about justice. No. And the monks were there because the monks had a purpose as well. Even though the teaching we had was that the Khmer Rouge killed the monks. They had a purpose to have the monks. I also found in Site 8 that there were scholars of Sanskrit, Pali, and Buddhism, and they were using this knowledge of deep culture to rebuild the revolution. They knew that to make a revolution, you had to work on the foundations of the year 0. So that's just a little snapshot on the way. Now, in order to get to Cambodia itself, it was almost impossible because the West boycotted the links. It was Washington, Canberra, Paris who said, we don't want links. We don't want to support them because they are propagating a communist revolution. No longer Chinese, admittedly, but Soviet. But I got there. We had to take 3 or 4 days to get there from Australia. It now takes 9 hours because to get there, you had to go through Hanoi and then to Vientiane and then to Paksay and then to Pochentong. They didn't want the links. As if the West would be contaminated by it. So we had to take our own toilet paper because you couldn't buy it, or at least that's what they said. But you could get beluga caviar in the main streets. The television at that time was a single channel, and it was showing black and white Kirov Ballet and Leningrad Ballet. And the single fax line to the Council of Ministers ran, there was only one fax line for the whole country. To make a telephone call, you had to book it for 3 days because it went from Phnom Penh to Delhi, from Delhi to Moscow, and from Moscow out. That was the climate. And it was a climate that was made by international collusion. Now, then, mental health. In that setting, what was going on? Well, there were no mental health experts at all. And when I say experts, I mean Cambodians, because there were no Cambodian psychiatrists and there were no Cambodian psychologists. I think there were 4. So what happened? Here was a country hungering for mental health and support that said, come and help us. You see, after 1990-91, we talk about the Paris Peace Accords. What came with the Paris Peace Accords? What was the Trojan horse that came in? Experts. Experts. And so where could we get the best? We could get the best experts from any country that could provide knowledge. I was one of the first psychiatrists, psychologists at RUPP, University of Phnom Penh. When I arrived, the professors were speaking Russian and Polish and Bulgarian and Spanish. Why? Because the experts then were archaeologists from Poland, anthropologists from somewhere else, the police from East Germany, and doctors from Cuba and Nicaragua. It was a melting pot of expertise. But within weeks, they were gone. The first January the 7th that I arrived for, and I remember very well Prampil Makara and the signs and the slogans on the streets, huge slogans. But those slogans, after 1 year of the Paris Peace Accords, disappeared. They were replaced by other ones. How could this happen? How could there be such a revolution in knowledge and ideology from 1 year to the next? In terms of mental health then, we got experts who came and said, you have a PTSD rate of 80% in Cambodia. 80%. But what was PTSD? It was a Western concept that was imported. There was no such thing as PTSD in Cambodia because it hadn't yet been invented in Cambodia. It was brought by pencil and paper questionnaires that were administered to people in large numbers and then number crunched, but the actual connection with the people was not present. Now, I want to get to the point. How to take another solution, another approach to understanding from the bottom up, from the inside out, what is suffering and what is to be done to relieve suffering using local resources. So in our work, we started to work with Buddhist monks, with traditional healers, with traditional birth attendants, with mediums, with astrologers and horoscope experts in villages. I was privileged to work at the time in founding the forerunner of TPO, Transcultural Psychosocial Organization, which at that time was a foreign Dutch NGO. Nevertheless, it had some cultural humility, and it said, let's start using the local resources rather than telling them what we think community health is about. Let them tell us. And we discovered, and through my action research with my colleagues, Willem van der Put and others, that the system locally was well established. It had been there for 2,500 years. So who were we to tell them? So the way that they viewed suffering and the relief to suffer was through 8 cardinal attractors. I won't go through them now, but in discussion, if there's time and people are interested, we could talk about this. The one that most Westerners know about is karma, but that's decontextualized because the Western concept of what is karma is plain wrong. The Western concept of karma, and you read about Cambodia, is written again and again wrong. It says karma means that you are reborn, you are born to suffer, you're reborn, you recreate suffering, and that is a passive, helpless position which simply accepts that Cambodians are going to suffer. Wrong. That's not what karma is about. And all of the cultural attractors, whether about triple poison of lopet, mohat, dosa, that means to say anger and greed and ignorance, again, is packaged wrongly. It's packaged somewhere in California or in some other place and re-imported into Cambodia. The Buddhism is exported from Cambodia, repackaged, commodified, and sent back. I think this is a very particular form, if I may say, of cultural genocide. It's another form of genocide perpetrated by well-meaning Westerners who tell the Cambodians what they should think and what they do think. I'll just leave that as a hanging thought before we get to my finale of really what can be done. What can be done? And if we work with cultural humility, you know, and you were referring before to Reka and cultural competence. Cultural humility is another Western idea started by Melanie Tervalon, that the ways that people experience suffering and re-traumatization since the Paris Accords are critical. We see in each particular epoch, whether it was during the Vietnamese occupation, whether it was in the period of the Western mental health invasion, whether it was during the course of natural suffering, like the Diamond Island bridge disaster of 2010, which became an international point, where 350 people died in just a few moments when they panicked on the bridge, whether it was when people suffered in the economic prosperity of the mass fainting attacks, which affected garment workers who were working in factories, making exports for the West, whether it was during the period of the HIV/AIDS outbreaks of the 1990s, when people who were not aware of how to prevent HIV developed it, whether it was during the subsequent period of COVID-19. There's this rubric, there's this theme going on here, that these points of suffering were brought by foreigners. Foreigners. HIV/AIDS was brought by foreigners. But here's something intriguing. You mentioned An Lung Veng. An Lung Veng in 1997, 1998, 1991, when we reached the point that the Khmer Rouge laid down their arms and joined the army of the military of the state. I went to Obai Tap. I met Khmer Rouge soldiers who had just put down their arms. What did they think came? What did they think HIV/AIDS was about? They said, we tried to purify the country to prevent them from being infected by the foreign germ. What happened? The Yun, the Vietnamese, they sent their prostitutes into Cambodia to poison the men. They were the contaminators. You see, so the politics turns into public health. When the COVID-19 pandemic came, there was exactly the same positioning. We Cambodians, we don't have these diseases. Why? Because we found the cure for those diseases 2,500 years ago. It was the foreigners who brought COVID-19 to our shores. We know how to prevent and how to treat suffering if only we are allowed to do it. 2,500 years ago, the first COVID disease, not COVID, but it was called snake wind disease, came to India, came to Vaishali, came to a city where there was an epidemic. We stopped it. Why? Because we could recite the Ratana Sutta. We knew how to bring the Buddhist principles to ban the disease. And that principle was applied ever since, even here. So I've got a lot more to say, but I want to say that in relation to intergenerational issues, we have right here and now an essential priority to understand how, let's not romanticize the healing, let's understand it, and how it is that in Buddhist psychotherapy, Buddhism itself places a critical lens onto what goes on between one generation and the next, and the one after that. That is the essence of Buddhist psychotherapy, to understand that karmic resolution is not simply accepting it. Karmic resolution means not to combat violence with violence, because if you combat violence with more violence, you promote the continuation of the karmic cycle of the wheel of suffering, in Pali called samsara, in Khmer Songsai. That goes on and on. That you can interrupt the wheel of suffering from one generation to the next by accepting that the Lord Buddha will punish the perpetrators in their own time. They will go to their own form of hell, the lowest level of hell, in their next life. They'll be reborn as worms or as creatures who crawl or as some other form of low life. Let the samsara suffering take care of itself. Let those people be punished by their own actions, by their own hand, in their next life. And you relieve your next life of propagating more suffering for yourself. So there's some points to raise for discussion. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you, Maurice. You're the one who said you had to leave after an hour and a half, so that's why I was anxious for you not to. So please leave us more time to breathe. And indeed, while we are talking, while the next phase of our webinar is, as I said, is a conversation among us first. There is a question that Christoph Kosminski asked in the chat that it actually concurs with part of what I was going to ask now. He says in the chat, in discussions about the Cambodian genocide, there's much focusing on the past and much history. Is a person who works here as a mental health specialist in modern Cambodia, I'm missing the discussion about the transgenerational influence of the trauma on the current society. The few data available on prevalence in substance use on prevalence of substance use, gender-based violence, suicide, mental disorders, etc., are alarming. That's what he says. And indeed, in our library, in our center's library, you can find, in the news, you can find a lot of related articles that Youk has fed me now, but also through the years. And also in our library, you can see this book, You can order it, but also Youk sent me the version that you can download, which is totally relevant. Cambodia's Hidden Scars, Trauma Psychology in the Wake of the Khmer Rouge. So please refer to that too. Christoph, you said you work there, but you're saying that what you're saying is that the data available, maybe at another webinar, or maybe Robbie, you can bring Christoph to maybe say, but no more than a minute or two, because there's so much more to say. Here is Christoph. Why won't you tell us in 2 minutes, please, what your impression is, not only what is published. Go ahead, unmute yourself. Christoph? We have the picture, we don't have the voice. Okay, so we'll wait, but Youk and King, can you please speak a bit more about the current situation of survivors and of their children? You're a survivor and child of survivors. You work with both. You worked with justice. You worked with so many other dimensions. But can you just tell us some of it from your point of view? And please, yeah, you can all unmute, because this is the time for our dialogue.
Well, in the last couple of years, we follow up with survivor, because survivors, and we have conducted a national survey having the young people go from door to door and meeting about 30,000 survivors across Cambodia. One of the ideas is from the justice point of view, young people want the evidence. They want to, you tell them something, they said, prove it. So our interest is to put them together to create a conversation, which we also believe that would contribute to healing, to stress release, to understanding, and to be the master of their own history. So we recruit about 3,000 young people across Cambodia from the local village, and we require them to go from door to door in their own home village to meet people above age of 55 at 3 persons a week. So they are representing this camp as a Camboco or as a volunteer with a long questionnaire. But we want them to begin only with one question after the introduction to the survivor. And most of the survivors start with their own auntie, grandpa, grandma, granduncle, or neighbor, basically in their own village. The only question that we ask the young people to develop conversation with the survivor is what is the thing that you always remember or never forget for the rest of your life? Can you share it with us? Only one question asked. And we train them how to ask question and to follow up question, but only one question asked. And we experience after one question being asked, you go down to 5 page, 10 page, 2-hour conversation. And we also ask the volunteer to convert it into MP3 audio sent to us to store. And also they can have their own view, what they think about the story in handwriting and submit to us. So we've been doing this look at the public health condition of survivor, because we think that they deserve than just symbolic reparation from the tribunal. We want to give them something as a token of appreciation, because for us, they are the ones who rebuilt Cambodia from beginning. It was them. It was the 5 million. It was the majority of them who were women who rebuilt this country. And now they has been forgotten by the invasion of technology, modernities, and economics, and so forth. So we want them to be remembered, start from their own children. So through this survey, we have learned that they all facing, most of them facing common disease, like diabetes, cancer, high blood pressure, and loneliness, which lead to trauma, to depression, to other things. So from that experience, we create a public health education program so that they can help themselves when they are not near doctor, when doctor is not nearby them. So we create a booklet and education so they can help themselves. But I think that they are aging, and every day they pass away one by one. And you also replaced by the new generation who were born after the Khmer Rouge. And that is their condition. It's and many stories are undocumented, untold, and many things are out there. And they tell different story from 15 years ago as they're getting older. And that's where they are now. So we're hoping to continue to support them in terms of free checkup annually, public health educations, and we also help them to access to social services in the village. So we develop 19 community-based center so that they can reach out to mostly those who live in remote area to help them better. We do the best we can because there's so many of them. Among 5 million, not all are really living in poverty, but there's still many out there that are still living at home, look after 3 grandchildren, while the children now went to work in South Korea or Thailand, so some other part of the country, hoping that they can send back the money home. But in fact, some of them, barely meet their own daily needs at the new location. So left behind the grandma with 3 grandchildren, depend on the government subsidy, which is very small, very limited. And also at the same time, they also have a public health condition. A lot of them are not healthy, I guess, because of not only the trauma, but the hardship that they endure during the Khmer Rouge time, also before the Khmer Rouge time. The survival of 5 million been traumatized by double period of time, the Vietnam Wars in the 60s and in the Khmer Rouge time. And then, like Maurice said, the invasion of the foreign ideology after the Paris Peace Accord. So they're very vulnerable, but amazingly, they live. They stand strong. They look after themselves, look after their grandchildren. But having the young generation, meeting them regularly, in the village, we hope that we contribute to healing process for them individually. So that's the situation now.
The trial and the process of the trial and the identification of victims, did that help any in people's openness to speak and to receive care and to seek care?
Well, people speak all the time. People communicate. We are human beings. We communicate. And always bother when foreign researchers asking me why people don't talk. We talk all the time. At different locations, different environments, different people. I talk to strangers about my mothers, but I never talk to my mother about my mother herself, for example. Because we're human, we speak, we communicate in silence. Silent also communicating sometimes. Sometimes people don't talk, but they communicate silently as well. So we recognize that. I think that the tribunal helped contribute to openness especially the former Khmer Rouge, who were in fear that they also might be subject of investigation. And but after the tribunal, I think you can see more. I think it's because of the age. The Khmer Rouge tribunal contribute in some way, but the age, the time is contribute more to the openness. I think people see things different, and perhaps they realize that there is the see hope in the young generation, because they also have many grandchildren themselves, they can relate it to it. And I think that because they have heard enough in the past 46 years, and they are aware the tribunal took place, they are aware that people are concerning about this. A lot of people spend the rest of their life to care for Cambodia. They understand. They understand, and they, I guess, perhaps leading to their openness better than 15, 20 years ago, which is back then the information was limited in terms of access, in terms of, social media was limited, but now they know more. You have to realize that they are human. They know what is right, what is wrong. They don't have to have a PhD to communicate, or they don't have to be a researcher to write, but they communicate on a daily basis. So I trust in that kind of spirit. So they always talk. I think that when they don't talk, in some cases, there must be a reason. There must be a reason. Among the former Khmer Rouge, they began to realize that they were associated with a regime that were prosecuted globally for the crime of genocide. So it's a sense of consciousness and guilt. But if you ask them only one question, what they remember, what they don't want to forget, everybody talk. And that's the most important lesson for the young generation to learn.
That's a very smart and wise question. Just a second, I want King to speak a little bit from his perspective as a child of survivors. Did your parents tell you? Did your parents talk at all?
Thank you. Yeah. Yes. Just a few points. Actually, my parents told me about the period of the Khmer Rouge and about their suffering. And I lost one of my older sister to the regime. She was 2 years old at that time. And my parents were evacuated from Kandal province to Battambang. And before the evacuation, like what we call, my grandfather have a lot of worker, for example, 30 men or family work for my grandfather. And when the Khmer Rouge came to power, one of the workers served as a group chief. And the group chief was the person who sent my parents to Battambang. And I heard from them last night, and I'm so surprised. Like our close relative who work as a group chief, and so as the Angka, and Angka sent them to Battambang. And I'm so surprised about this information. But actually, as a person who was born after the Khmer Rouge, I'm so lucky to work with DC camp to do research and learn about the history from the document that DC camp store here, and expand my knowledge on that. And I'm also part of the team to educate, to train teacher how to teach student at school. And I'm part of the national group with the Ministry of Education staff, also join. And we train a lot of teacher at the national level, regional level, provincial level, commune level. So this is the way that we spread the information about the Khmer Rouge to the public, to the student at all high school. And yeah, as our DC camp director has mentioned, like tribunal also the key to reaffirm, to confirm the truth about what happened to our country. Like it's not a folktale at all, the Khmer Rouge history. So we have the document, we have the story from survivor, and we have the tribunal. So these are the good component to educate our people from this and next generation about the Khmer Rouge genocide, and we have to prevent it from happening again. So that's what we are doing and continue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, you may not know actually that in the last 15 years, I created the first measure to assess intergenerational legacies of trauma. And we have very interesting international findings, including findings that compare survivors in their homeland with those who are in the diaspora. So that might be of interest to all of us. And Youk, we should do a separate webinar on the meaning of silent communication. And because, of course, culturally, it makes a difference. You feel that you're communicating in the silence. In other cultures, they may feel that they're not, right? That silence is non-communication. And then the heartbreak or the sense of intimacy is the exact opposite. It's extraordinary. Rekha, in your family, and in the families you've worked with, and in the community you've belonged to, was there an intergenerational open communication? And Maurice, I will go to you last because you've worked in many different cultures too. But Rekha, can you reflect on that? Would you please?
Yeah, sure. So you're asking if there was intergenerational communication, like passing on like the stories to their children? Yeah, absolutely. Definitely in my family, the stories are told, again, highlighting strength and resiliency and the pain and the hardship. But also in the families that I worked with at the mental health clinic, there's a lot of the stories they tell them. The Cambodian survivors tell them as if it was yesterday. They can remember every single detail. And they also pass it on to their own families as well. And it happens in my aunt and uncles. They pass it on to their, like my cousins, and stories are very much alive in our family.
It's very interesting and very important. Indeed, I've written a great deal about the silence in families of survivors of the Holocaust. And Maurice, you might remember from your early days in Massachusetts, where the assumption was that Cambodian families don't speak, that instead of speaking, they experience. That was Richard Molika's, one of Richard's findings at the time, right? That instead of talking and expressing, they express it bodily, psychosomatically through stomach pain and headaches and da. And I remember very well when I was training people to say to them, well, so what does your stomach tell you? Or what is your head trying to tell you? So this is a very interesting discussion. What do you remember, Maurice?
I'm going to say in public, and I'm old enough to get away with it, that I don't agree with a single word of it.
You don't agree with
I don't agree with a single
what?
word of it.
Of what?
That was the fashion of the time, that Westerners talk and
others
non-Westerners
don't. Exactly.
talk with their
Exactly.
bodies.
Okay.
I just don't agree with it. I think
Okay.
what we're not listening to is the way that people are communicating. It's what Youk said, that people communicate through what we might think of as foreigners as silence, but it's filled with information. For example, and now to get to the point of Krzysztof Kosminski's excellent question, I want to deal with that. This has to do with what Youk said about memory intergenerationally. And here I think what we're dealing with is violence transcribed intergenerationally. And violence didn't start with the Khmer Rouge. There was violence during the Lon Nol regime. There was violence in the Khmer Sarak. You could even say there was violence in 1862 when the French came with a mission civilisatrice to teach the people how not to be primitive. That's already violence, cultural violence. But to get to the point about Krzysztof's question, I've spent a lot of time in the last few years dealing with gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, acid attack, and other conditions like this, monastic abuse. We can't romanticize the Cambodian society and say it's got all the answers, because now the Buddhist monks themselves are corrupt. Not all, some. Buddhist monks themselves commit child sexual abuse. Buddhist monks themselves bugger child boys who are monastic novices en masse, 10 at a time. So let's not be too smart about this. But the point is that the intergenerational communication comes through a culturally appropriate manner. And the idioms that most Westerners never think about to do with Priye, Bisawi, Khmawi, Are, Nektar, and then beyond that, Parmatiyau, and Kombot Kabal. Every Cambodian villager knows these things, but they're not asked. They know that when there is some remnant of an intergenerational problem from the time of the Khmer Rouge, that they're going to experience, and not just as a somatization, as Molika said, but as an actual experience. And for example, the Chamchiat, it's a real thing. The parent dies in the Khmer Rouge time, and their Vinyan, their soul, is reincarnated, not just in the children, but the grandchildren or the great children. And you may see, because the child is born, the baby is born with a snam, with a mark here. This is where the ancestor was manacled or tied up before being killed. And the descendant has the mark. How does this happen? It's true. And that's an example. But the point about acid attack, let me just finish my comment on that point. In the West, we say, oh, we don't do acid attack. That means we wouldn't be so savage as to throw nitric acid or sulfuric acid onto the face of a parent or a child. They do that. Cambodians do that. They do. But so do people in London. The highest rate of acid attack growth is in London, not Cambodia. But somehow we can learn a lot. And in our research, we try to see what is the meaning of people being so violent when they have no war anymore. There's an outbreak of peace. Why would people throw acid on their wives or their husbands or their children? We can see there are two forms of understanding here. One has to do with jealousy, the other to do with envy. In the jealousy, you take a situation where there's the outbreak of peace, but the man has no employment. The man is sitting at home. He can't work. He can't support his wife. His wife, who traditionally is supposed to be Bongvil Jonkran, supposed to be running around the hearth making the food, while her husband is earning the money. He's at home. What can he do? He drinks. He gambles. He goes out and has other women. And he's humiliated and he's angry. And so he beats his wife. Or the wife is jealous of him. Or the wife is angry at him and she throws acid on him. And in the other form, that to do with envy, what happens when there is a disruption to the economy in the system in the village, And so many people have to borrow money. And they borrow money, 30% interest, 50% interest, bankrupt, and anger. And so they throw acid too. They throw acid on the people who lent them the money. They throw acid on their relatives. They throw acid on strangers. And before you know it, you have Krzysztof Kozminski's question. What is the wholesale form of violence in the community, gender-based, acid attack, and other things, as an expression of a disruption to the fabric of the community? And I don't think any psychiatrist or psychologist can fix that. It requires a more systemic approach.
That's why we are discussing things on so many dimensions instead of focusing only on one. But then we have a larger role of how to connect the different dimensions. So it makes sense. So I can't not do it. I have to ask you your question back. What if it was called genocide right then? What if you yourself asked the question, what if it was named genocide much earlier? Am I wrong? I might be wrong. It's quite possible.
About speaker, about what?
Yeah, unmute.
Today,
What if we started the trial much earlier?
if the tribunal took place much earlier, would have been
Yes.
different. Is that your question?
One of them, yes. And I'm asking because I know that many people in the audience come from all kinds of other genocides. So,
Well, I mean, if you ask people of Cambodia today,
yeah,
when they refer to genocide, it's not necessary by legal definition. The intent to kill in whole or in part of the ethnic group's ethnicity or religious group at all. I think that they refer to genocide because the translation of the word genocide is so close to the Khmer languages, and they get used to it because there's no other languages, no other word that can describe what happened to them during the Khmer Rouge time. Because like we saw, Perlai mean killing, and Pu mean seed, and Sa mean like ethnic. So it's so close to the Khmer languages because we always refer to the seed, meaning the father or the family. If you kill the father, you kill the entire family. If you don't have the seed to plant the rice, you don't have right to eat. So even for the Khmer people today, genocide not necessarily legal definition like many other educated or Western scholar at all. So when we try to explain to them that genocide means required element, one is intent, two is to kill, and secondly, destroy in whole or in part of the particular ethnic group, they really don't react surprisingly or supportively, because they already have their own mindset, what they mean by genocide, what genocide mean to them. I think that because we are humans, we seem to have the instinct of what justice mean to all of us. Because when you look around, when a rich kid steal a motorbike, didn't get the same punishment of the poor kid who stole a motorbike, people feel that injustice immediately. And Cambodians have experienced injustice for the rest of our history. So that's we train naturally to define the meaning of justice and to understand the meaning of justice at all time. And that's why, despite of the poverty, starvation, as embargoes or present of the Vietnamese occupation, people still want justice first before anything else. But because the lack of knowledge, lack of education to communicate, because most of the intellectuals were killed by the Khmer Rouge, it was no one really speak out loudly and demand this more effectively. It took us 30 years to have Rekha Kun to be born to do this. But back then, I mean, her parents, her grandparents did not have that ability to address this issue globally. We don't even speak English at that time, for example, because most of the intellectuals were targeted and mostly killed by the Khmer Rouge, and one that left behind were traumatized and flee the country and up somewhere else, and was too small to tell the world. So I think that had the tribunal took place much earlier, which I insist, and perhaps the situation would have been different, because most survivors were energetic, were much younger, evidence were more fresh, the situation was different, and if the tribunal were formed by the judge with international experience, perhaps the court would have been better, contribute more effectively to the process of justice itself. Most of the international judges don't have international experience, for example. They basically foreigner come with the packages. And, the Khmer Rouge cases were very complicated. It has been 25 years that took place already. So it was very intimidating to a lot of foreign judges and prosecutors, for example. But I still believe that the tribunal is the last demand. Because when you look back in 1979, so much has been done to bring a closure through fighting with the border, to reconciliation effort. Maurice speaking about one frequency TV program, back then only one radio frequency, and the government used that radio program to call for national reconciliation. There's a hatred day, there's many things. The museum that developed, they make all effort, but still no justice. And therefore, I think to me, the tribunal is very important, also with international participation, because they want to be recognized. The crime was committed against them. Doesn't matter what you call it. The killing that took place against their family member, they want the international community to be part of it. And then it's over for them. And exactly what we anticipate, as you can see that in 1998, despite the government call Khmer Rouge to be integrated, but their policy has been modified to actually target the small group of the leader to be prosecuted. If you recall, last December of 1998, Ieng Sri Nuon Chea Kisupon met Hun Sen at his own residence, but it was not over yet in terms of reconciliation. They actually turned out to be the subject of the court with UN participation for investigation and put on trial, which a little bit perhaps contradicting to the promise that he made for the national reconciliation. Yeah. And that you can see the influence, the demand of the people is still up high. And a lot of people doesn't like the tribunal at all. People criticize the tribunal. Some people hate it, but some people like it. But for me, it creates a sense of public history, that people can have the ownership of your own history. In Cambodia, it's a country that history will read by everybody. There's no, you can have your own narrative. I will have my own narrative. I can say different things. So I think that itself also perhaps in a sense that also contribute to the democratic society, that people can have a say in their own personal history or family history openly. I'm hoping that other topic can be the same way. That people can express, can say things the same way we talk about the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia today. So the tribunal contribute to that aspect. And now it's compulsory. Because of the tribunal, we took the opportunity to make us a reparation. When you ask survivor, none of them, some of foreigners try to inject the idea that you should ask for money for what you have lost. during the Khmer Rouge time. But they find it hard to ask 5 million people to respond positive to that question. When it comes to the understanding of the right to life, the suffering, and no one would understand better than those who survived the genocide. They want justice. They want justice. Then $1,000, then $2,000, then $5,000. They want justice. So the idea of the Asian way or the Cambodian people is completely different from the expression from the West. It's completely different. And we still...
The West is different from each other too.
Yeah. So I think that when it comes to genocide, Cambodia, speaking from a cultural perspective and understanding languages, the way how they feel they've been through it rather than by legal definition. And I think they will continue to do that. And one thing that's challenging after working with so many years with survivors, there's always a question that you cannot answer. It doesn't matter how much you try. And I refer to Maurice a little bit because he seemed to deeply understood Khmer culture and Buddhism. But people always ask this question and they don't want to hear the answer, or they want the answer the way they want it, is why Cambodian killing Cambodian? They ask that question all the time. And I think that this question will be continue to be asked in the next 15 years, 20 years. And there will be no answer to it. And that is a sign of trauma and trust. People just don't trust everybody. And they've been traumatized, and they have to find something that they can be the superior over it. It's the question that you cannot answer. Like right now, surprisingly, I sometimes listen to the Khmer Rouge song. The Khmer Rouge song was traumatizing during the Khmer Rouge time. But why I listen to it now? That's the son of I now, it's the superior that I can listen to it whenever I like. I listen to the song that played by the perpetrator at some point. So I recognize that I also been traumatized myself. And that's how I worked on this for so long, because I recognize that I also been traumatized because I was a child at the age of 14 and was separated and lived very lonely in the field alone for years and years. And I would like to ask Maurice to help me out later. I always get annoyed when I'm asked by foreigner why Cambodians don't speak to each other about the Khmer Rouge. I got extremely annoyed by that question. I used to answer for 3 hours to express my anger. Why people always ask me that question, why that we don't speak to each other about the violence, about the crime of the Khmer Rouge. We do. But what else should we do to prove that we speak to each other? And I have been hearing this question in the last 30 years all the time. All the time. All the time. All the time. And I got annoyed by this question. So I react a little bit extreme sometimes. And I know that I act extremely to respond to this. But I know that I was extreme, but I do it anyway, because to respond to a question that's so naive, that did fail to recognize me or survival of human being. And that's what I said, my mom never speak to me, but I know she communicates in silence. She says something, but she just didn't express the word because of cultural barrier, because of gender differences, because of time, because of age, because of the environment, because of concern, because of love. There's many other reasons. But why Western education fail to understand it?
I can answer the question now in 3 words. Blame the victim. What happened every time? The foreigner comes and says, you are the cause of your own downfall. You don't know how to communicate. You are aggressive. You made violence from the time of Angkor Wat. You always did it. It's your fault. And if you would speak like we do, you wouldn't do it anymore.
It's, yeah. I did my second doctorate on the conspiracy of silence, of why people don't listen to survivors, why they don't listen and how they don't listen. And I think in some ways, the question is, survivors stop talking because people don't listen to them. So a lot of the issue of speaking has to do with having a listener and having the listener receive the communication. And what you're saying is you have the communication already with your mom.
Well, we're human, we communicate, you don't, we're not buffalo, we're not cow. We're human, so we communicate. We have the instinct.
No,
to know
but
what's right and wrong.
I got a doctorate for that. Reka, you might want to read it. It's good stuff. But I think Maurice understands it not only theoretically, but he was there and understands more and lived in a way in Cambodia and made it his business to learn the language and to understand the soul, so to speak. That's why he's here with us tonight. But honest to God, the way I was educated was that Cambodians did not speak. It was the classic understanding. Remember, Maurice?
That's
That
why I
was the
said I don't agree.
understanding. So in my book, in my 1998 book, Reka, you should know it because it is about what your doctorate is. This is 1998. There are at least 2 chapters that describe why Cambodians don't speak. And really, it didn't ask whether they speak in the families. It really spoke about whether Cambodians speak in the language of the American listener to the American. These are very painful questions. I wonder, Reka, if you encounter this kind of situation in your practice, not just with your patients or clients, but as compared with therapists who are not Cambodians or not BIPOC, because you said you're interested in the whole conglomerate of the BIPOC. Do you have any?
You mean like other clinicians who work with?
Comparing you with non-BIPOC therapists. I don't know, maybe I'm making a question where it's not relevant. But I know there's a lot of literature about it, but.
Yeah. Can you ask that one more time?
Yeah, I'm asking whether in your experience, and you're so young, so I don't know. In your experience, comparing yourself and other BIPOC therapists. BIPOC, why don't you tell people what BIPOC is so I don't sound like we're having secret language?
Yeah, I mean, just working with other cultures, right? Like a person of color. And so
it's mostly color, yeah. Brown eyes, right?
But yeah, I guess that's how they labeled it. So, but yeah, just working with other cultures. But what was the question you were asking?
It is whether you have experienced difference between you and people of color, therapists, with those who are white Americans working with the same populations?
Is a difference. I'm not 100% sure, but at the clinics that I worked at, there were a handful of we served the Asian population community, so it depended on, you know, if the clinician spoke another language, then they were, you know, they're just, I guess it was specialized for that. So a lot of other Asian cultures would come in and we would use these therapists per, you know, per the language. If there was a non-person of color therapist, we would use interpreters. And so I think as we're talking about all of this, I think a lot of the times they do tell their story because they know that they're going to get, they're trying to get assistance for it. And so stories will be told. I don't know if you're talking about
assistance in what form?
Yeah, like it could be for mental health assistance, right? Like services, for like medication, or it could be case management, really. It could help, you know, their livelihood.
Now, do you have any comments or questions about something in this panel that was said? King, do you have any comment or question of each other?
Okay. I want to add, maybe Pooh, you forget about the PRT, People Revolutionary Tribunal. It happened in August 1979. It was the first tribunal that was created by the post Khmer Rouge government we call People Republic of Cambodia. The tribunal at that time tried Pol Pot and Ieng Sary clique, what we call, for on child genocide. Both of them were tried in absentia because they were at the border already. So that's the first effort that the government at that time tried to bring justice to the Khmer Cambodian people. And the tribunal, as I wrote in my dissertation, it was the first effort that tried to to bring revenge killing to an end, because immediately after the Khmer Rouge regime, like people take revenge against each other in the first 3 or 6 months. So that's why tribunal really helped. But the tribunal itself is not so successful because the international community do not recognize it as a due process of fairness at all. That's why we have a Khmer Rouge tribunal we call an extraordinary chamber in the court of Cambodia. That's well recognized by the international community. That's the fair due process and fairness for the tribunal process.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, just want to add that point. Thank you.
So it wasn't the first, so the international was not the first attempt at justice. That's very important to know.
I think Cambodia have tried many processes to end the Khmer Rouge, to be stabilized, to move on. But it took Cambodia almost like 40 years to do so. So, you know, the Khmer genocide was devastated the entire population. You have the country on the map, but you don't have resources. you don't have infrastructure, you don't have many things, all were completely destroyed by the Khmer Rouge. So Cambodia has tried many processes in the past 40 years, and that sometimes overlooked, and also that particular period were under study, under research, and under also taught in school as well, or back then were taught as a political lesson, and therefore were not taught as a history. So even in history itself, Cambodians sort of still reforming, in the process of reforming. What is history is all about? Like Maurice mentioned, back in the 80s, you meet Polish, Russian, the Czech, Hungarian, Bulgarian, from the east part of the world, which perhaps that there's no differences between history and propaganda, or history by chronology, not by thematic, for example. Not much necessary about understanding of history. And only recently that students began to appreciate and enroll in the history department more than ever, as compared to the last 15 years. My question to Maureen, I'm interested in this psychology because we don't have the expertise. We're sort of wandering around and interested, knowing but don't know what to do. I always call for a national center. And recently I saw South Korean fund medical school. I always wanted to have a school like that they bring all the experts around the world to really study this traumatized population. Cambodian is languages only 20 million people speak around the world. Among us is billion. It's only 20 million understand this language, this culture, but yet they've been traumatized. They have double traumatized by Vietnam War and by genocide, by the invasion of foreign ideology. Even though Maureen knows a lot, I can sense that he knows so much on Buddhism, the way he described it, he knows exactly what it is. But I still have a question, what is the best treatment to deal with this traumatized population, which might also have been affected to the younger generation already in this country? And there should be an emergency or a call for a better treatment. Because right now, when the government start to recognize this topic, they start to have clinic in almost every single hospital in the provinces. Right now, when you go to Cambodian provinces, there's a room. It's called a mental health. Almost every small clinic in the village level, but there's no doctor there. There's no nurse there. But yet nobody go to pagoda, because when you go to pagoda, you have to bring the money with you. And people need to live. They don't have money to go to bring to the monk. So even if you go to a monk for water blessing, you need to bring some money too. You have to buy the candle, incense, you have to buy food, cigarette. It costs money. So this then is began because, home economics is the more demand than spend money to go to get a water blessing from the monk at pagoda, which is also cost transportation sometimes. And some of the Buddhist monks are also not polluted. They having girlfriend, they have Facebook, they chat on the phone, they misconduct for some reason. Right. So lead Cambodians are wandering again, back to square one. So how do we deal with this? Well, everyone recognize this, but yet it's more dangerous than not being recognized, than being recognized but nothing has been done to meet the need of the population. I think it's more dangerous now on this topic.
I'm going to send you to share with you the link to the talk I gave that summarizes our study that share understanding about how the intergenerational transmission happens psychosocially. Maybe we can have a conversation about it then again. So I will send you both in writing and one that I was speaking, and it even exists in French. So you can listen to it both in English and in French. It's actually all on our website. The Danieli inventory is on our website. We have 60 webinars on our website. As of tomorrow, our webinar now will be on our website for people all over the world to study from.
Well, yeah, Al, I mean, website is one thing, but how you put this into practice, like implementation of the idea of the process that it might work. You want this like really,
I will give you an example.
yeah,
One of the main findings of our study with Holocaust survivors and their children is that when the parent, okay, I have to go back a step. Trauma is a rupture in the systems of lives of the survivors. That you understand that, right? We found in our study that there are 4 ways that survivors adapt to life with trauma. One is what we call the victim style. The second is the fighter style. The third is the numb style. But I don't want to, if we are over time, and I don't want to give the impression that 5-minute summary of 50 years of experience will do it justice, okay? So, and the fourth style is in quotation mark, those who made it, survivors who behave like nothing ever happened, nothing ever happened to them. And there are many ways, okay, in terms of intergenerational transmission, it's when the parents adopted the victim style or the numb style that puts the children at risk for problems. Okay? Independently of that, just the fact of the genocide is traumatizing to the children, even if they were not alive then. Okay, so what we found is it's not only the parents and how the parents behave, it's also the mere fact that the people suffered a genocide and that the children were born into a world that suffered a genocide that is traumatizing even more than what the parents would have done or not done, or behaved or spoken. So you're saying what to do? Well, first of all, treat survivors, not 70 years later, but help survivors when they need help. Help them not to remain victims as their major identity in life. Help them understand that that's not the only way that they should be or they can be. And Youk, this is one of my problems with international justice and justice and criminal justice when it comes to atrocity crimes, because it takes so long that the victim has to keep proving that he or she is a victim, you see? And meanwhile, they give birth to children while they must prove that they are victims. So in effect, the justice system forces a victim to remain as a victim. You see, there is such an absurdity in it. And
Well,
therefore,
yeah.
and you know, the International Criminal Court finally acknowledged intergenerational transmission. Finally, only now.
Well, you seem to refer to the civil law, the civil party, which I never applied to be one of them myself.
I know. Well, I'll send you, look, we have the richest library in the world on these issues. It's all on our website. And also, we have working groups. We have a Haiti working group. We have a Rwanda working group. We have a Ukraine working group. We have a Yazidi working group. We have a nuclear working group of people who were born to people who were exposed to nuclear bombing or etc. We have plenty. If you guys want to keep in touch and do that, I would love that more than anything. It's you know, we have been close to each other for 40 years, for crying out loud. It's very simple. And same with you, Maurice. I think you can add, it's so much. So if you want to, be in touch. And you are on our honorary board. King, I would love it if you want to join our advisory council. And Reka, you can be part of it. And I'm sure you can even recommend other colleagues of yours in California who might be very happy to know that this is a possibility. And Maurice, it's time you join us one way or the other. But I can't see anything better, you see, because what happens is we learn from each other. Not only we learn from each other, but from what you spoke today, all of the audience from Rwanda, we had audience from Rwanda, from Israel, I didn't even look very carefully. They learn. You touch someone who just you spoke from your heart about communicating with your mom just by a look or a word. They know exactly what you mean. And that's what we're here for at any rate. So let's think about that. And we are already 2 hours, way over 2 hours. So the question is whether you want to say the last word or you want to say any word before the last word first. And we can just decide to talk again soon. So let's start from the last one. Maurice, you will be the first one to say the last word. We'll go back now.
I have nothing that I can say in words. I just feel humility because of the people here who are sharing the platform and who know so much more than I ever will, and how much I've learned from the three of you and also from you, Yael, and also from the single person who put a question in from Dr. Kosminski.
You know him? You know Christoph?
No.
He always comes to us. Okay, wonderful. Reka, your last words, if you will.
Yeah, the same as Maurice. I am very appreciative and grateful that I am here with you all, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
And King, you next to last.
Okay, so thank you so much, yeah, for letting me join this conversation, and it's a good memory of our 46th anniversaries of the Victory Days over genocide, and it's a ongoing effort to teach and prevent genocide from happening again in Cambodia and in the rest of the world. That's what we aim for it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I want the world I want to remind the world to remember that even those who suffer by any crime, including crime of genocide, we are human beings. So we know what is right, what is wrong, and we react, we communicate, we speak, and we do seek justice. And that from there, I think that perhaps others can help us better, knowing that we cannot find justice alone. But when you don't recognize that we are human beings, you begin to classify us in certain category that the way you think, that perhaps this would allow room for genocide to reoccur again and again. Because we discriminate, we classify, we categorize our own human race. And I think that that's such easy to understand, to learn such a basic lesson, just to recognize someone like you as a person so that you can help them better. So I want that very much because I encountered that all this decade, that while we speak against genocide, when we try to prosecute genocide or prevent genocide, but we hardly recognize those who suffer as a person, who suffer by genocide itself. So that's a huge contradiction, and I wish everyone look at it first before you start to do something to assist others. That would be my frustrating last word, because I encountered it for so many decades. I just surprisingly that people quickly start with that question, you know. And a person, you know, from a human being perspective, you don't have to be Dr. Daniel Lee or Eisenberg. You can know as a person, as human being, you can sense what injustice is all about. When injustice took place against you, you can sense that. You don't have to go to law school to understand what is right, what is wrong. As a human being, you know that. When somebody harm you, when somebody take away from you, when you did wrong to others, you know it too. That's human, it's all about. So I think if we recognize that, we can begin perhaps the right journey for a better world for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. It's hard to get off for you and for the rest of the very committed audience. Thank you for remaining with us. By tonight or tomorrow, you will receive the announcement of our next webinar on January 15, which will be on education under any circumstance. And the presenters are from refugee young women in Pakistan, from Afghanistan, who are teaching mothers how to teach their children in school, and a Yazidi teacher who was a student in a refugee camp. And then on the 26th of the month, we would have a film, The Girl from Salonika. It's a Holocaust film on the girl from Salonika, and the panelists will be her son and her grandson and the filmmaker. So you can see we sort of try to follow national and international days, so it's historically meaningful to people and with the issues that are important to all of us. So, but going back to Youk's last word, and all of you, I can't thank you enough. And I hope we continue in every way that may be of help. So thank you.